Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to talk about something that keeps coming up about Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, or Gurey, as the Somali people used to call him, or Gran, as he was called by the Amharas. And both nicknames mean left-handed, because that seems that that's what he was. Now, the identity of Gurey is one that elicits a lot of, I can say even a lot of strong emotions in people. And I've seen a lot of comments about that. I know there is one person, Jabarta10, is a follower of mine. And he sent me a lot of stuff about Gurey. And he's trying to persuade me that Ahmed bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi was actually an Oromo, and he wasn't a Somali, or he wasn't an Harari, or he wasn't a Balo, as commonly thought. Now, yeah, I did look at some of the videos you sent me, but I did more than that. And I know, this is history, and history is always a victim of revisionism. And we can't run away from that, unfortunately. There will always be facts about history that are changed to fit certain narratives. And because of that, often we end up not knowing what happened actually. But I'm going to talk about this topic, and I'm going to try to be very careful with it because it's a very, I can say, touchy topic. Now, Gurey, of course, for those who don't know who Gurey is, or Ahmed bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi, he was an Imam of Adal Sultanate. Now, Adal Sultanate is one of the most powerful sultanates to ever emerge in the Horn of Africa. And he ruled the Adal Sultanate from 1520s to 1543, when he was killed. The biggest achievement of Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi was conquering Abyssinia around late 1530s. He conquered Abyssinia and ruled over it for maybe 1 or 2 years or 3 years. And he also, we can say, became a critical, personality when it came to the global affairs of that century. In this century of 16th century, the world had two, we can say, superpowers at this point, and it was Portugal and the Ottoman Empire. Portugal and the Ottoman Empire both had interest in Africa and the rest of the world, of course, and they were competing, of course, to have influence over Africa, particularly the Horn of Africa. And so they had proxies, and it turned out that the Ottoman Empire had Adal Sultanate as its proxy, or one of the many, of course. And the Portuguese ended up having Abyssinia as its proxy in the Horn of Africa. And of course, now the battle that went on, or the war that went on between Adal and Abyssinia, was basically a war between the Ottoman Empire and the Portuguese. That's what it was to a large extent. Of course, there were local issues that fueled the conflict. So Ahmad bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi, or Gurey, played a significant role in that conflict. And with the support of the Turks, he managed to attack Ethiopia, or Abyssinia then, which was being helped by the Portuguese. And at some point, of course, the Portuguese sent one Cristavio da Gama, son of Vasco da Gama, and he came with an army to Ethiopia, or to Abyssinia, to help the Abyssinian monarchy push back on the fight that they had with the Adal Sultanate. And we have to know that, or we have to bear in mind that this is a conflict that went on for a very long time. And it will be unfair to apportion blame to one side or another and say maybe it is the Abyssinians who are the aggressors, or say that the Adal Sultanate was the aggressor. This is a conflict that is so complex, and it's so hard to assign blame like that. Both sides did initiate attacks and invasions, and both sides did become victims of course, invasions and attacks. So when you try to look at that war, it can be very difficult to tell for sure who we can put the blame to be the initiator of the war, or the person we can put the blame to and be like they are the cause of that war that went on for a very long time, actually. So at some point, as I've said, Ahmed bin Ibrahim al-Ghazi managed to go to Abyssinia, and he managed to conquer almost the entire land, actually. And the king then had to run away, and he became, maybe we can say, an outlaw. Basically, he didn't have a place to rule from, while the rest of the country was actually under the rule of Gurey. And then, of course, the Portuguese come, as I've said, with Cristavio as the leader, and Gurey manages to defeat Cristavio, and Cristavio is killed. But then the remnants of his soldiers managed to combine forces with the soldiers, or the army, or the remaining army of the Ethiopian or the Abyssinian Empire, and they have a battle. And then in 1543, Gurey is defeated and is killed at the battlefield, actually. And his death led to decline of the Adal Sultanate. Up to that point, the Adal Sultanate had really grown. It had become very powerful. And the Adal Sultanate army goes back home, and then the Sultanate declines from that point on. Now, the topic of the video is, of course, about his ethnic background. And before I give out what I've dug around, I have to say this. Sometimes we look at history and we judge it basing our modern or current situation, and that becomes unfair to the historical facts. So, for example, trying to read around, I realized that in the Adal Sultanate, ethnic background wasn't that important, actually. Like, the citizens didn't put a lot of emphasis on your ethnic background. Of course, there were citizens who came from the Somali ethnic group. There are those who came from the Harari ethnic group. There are those who came from the Balo, and different other groups, actually, Arabs. There were so many different groups of people who became citizens of the Adal Sultanate. And so ethnicity wasn't that important. And even Gurey himself seems like he didn't put so much into that. And we can even say, to be fair to him, if we are going to be fair to him today, we should first think about how he saw himself. Maybe we don't have his personal writings, have not come across them. Maybe there are. And if somebody knows of his personal writings, that would be very useful content to read. And from it, we can, of course, see how he viewed himself. It's so important for us to bear in mind, how did he view himself? And because I've not read any of his personal texts, I can only come up to a conclusion by looking at his actions. And his actions tell me that he saw himself in a way that we are not trying to see him. He saw himself first as a Muslim. I think that's how he saw himself first. His core identity was that of a Muslim. That's how he saw himself. And then he saw himself as a soldier of God. And he saw himself as a leader of Adal. I think that's how he saw himself. I don't think, going by his actions, that he ever, or he gave so much, or he put so much emphasis on his ethnic background as his primary identity. I doubt that. I think he put his religious beliefs to be his most important or primary identity. Now, having said that, we can still go ahead and try to speculate, and I'm going to say this is speculation, to speculate on his ethnic background. And there are so many documents that attempt to tell us what tribe or ethnic group he belonged to. I've seen some of the, of course, I've not read the documents Jabarto is kind of like drawing from to come to his conclusion that Gurey was actually an Oromo. I decided to, or I told myself, there are so many documents that have been written about him, or that mention him at least. And I think it's better if we try to find a source that is closest to him. And when I say that, I mean a contemporary or a source from a contemporary, somebody who lived during that time and somebody who actually maybe knew him personally. I think that that could be more helpful. Unfortunately, we have a document that comes close to that, and it's a document that is titled Futu al-Habasa, or the conquering of Abyssinia. And this is a document that was written by one Sihab ad-Adin bin Ahmed something. He has a very long name. Looks like it used to be something to have very long names that say son of, son of, son of, son of. You get the point. He's popularly known as Arab Faqih, and it is said that he was of Yemeni origin, but he was a citizen of Adal. And it says that he lived, because even the book was written maybe 13 years after the death of Gurey, around there. Maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me if you know of more info about that. I've read the document. It's a very interesting document, and I will encourage you to read the document, not just to understand who Gurey was, but to also get to understand the history of the Horn of Africa, especially the Adal Sultanate and how it related with others, especially the Abyssinian monarchy or empire and others. Now, when reading the document, I found some interesting details. Now, I need to point out that so far where I've read, there is nowhere that the writer or Arab Faqih has categorically said that the Imam was this or that. There is none. Now, he does mention that he came from a town called Zaka. He says he came from Zaka. And he also says something else that made me a little bit confused, because he says that the Sultan who ruled before the Imam, who went by the name Abu Bakr also came from Zaka. Now, trying to Google today or try to use the internet to try to find if there is a town in the Horn of Africa called Zaka, I can't get it. And if you know of a place called Zaka, and it's Z-A, and then there's an apostrophe up there, and then K-A. If you know of such a place, please let me know, because the book says that was his home, this home village. That's where he came from, hometown, which is called Zaka. But then it turns out that Abu Bakr also came from Zaka. Now, here is why I found it a little bit confusing when he said that Abu Bakr also came from Zaka, and it's in relation to the Somali people. Here is why. When Gurey started going against the Sultan, because they had differences, because the Sultan, Abu Bakr, seems like he went out of the way, according at least to how Gurey saw it. He allowed so much, degeneracy maybe, like he allowed alcohol, and then he allowed these behaviors in the population that did not align with the religion of Islam. He also allowed a lot of crime happened during his rule. People were being robbed in the roads, and things became so bad. And so that was the primary issue that Gurey had with Abu Bakr, the Sultan. So the Sultan had it seems like the Sultan was not a Somali himself. He was something else. And he likely was the same ethnic background as Gurey, even though the writer does not mention that, but it tells us they came from the same place. Now, Abu Bakr, his support core base used to be the Somali people. And the writer goes ahead and tells us, even him becoming a sultan, it was through the support of the Somali people, the soldiery in particular. And after he became the sultan, he continued getting this huge support from the Somali people. And when Gurey decided to challenge him, it was the Somali people, to a large extent, who were backing Sultan Abu Bakr. And when things became hot in Adal, Sultan Abu Bakr escaped, and he went into the land of the Somali. And that tells me that while the Adal Sultanate was a huge territory, it seems like the majority of Somalis lived outside it, which makes sense, of course, if you look at the map even today. Looks like majority of Somalis lived outside the Adal Sultanate, but there were Somalis who were part of the Adal Sultanate, and they were just one of the many ethnic groups that were within the Adal Sultanate. Now, when Abu Bakr escapes, he went into the land of the Somali people. That's what the writer tells us, that is Arab Faqih. And he says, Gurey attempted to pursue him into the land of the Somali people, and initially he failed. But over time, he succeeded. And the way the writer puts, the way he explains things, seems like the Somali initially did not like Gurey. They did not like him. Now, and Gurey started fighting Abyssinia before he became the leader of Adal. And in fact, he did that while Abu Bakr was still the Sultan, but it was not under the direction of Abu Bakr. It is because an Abyssinian army came and attacked a place where he used to stay, and he mobilized a group of soldiers, and they went and they attacked, or they defended the villages, and they were very successful. And the news reached Abu Bakr. And this is what the writer says. When the Sultan Abu Bakr and the Somalis he had with him heard the news about them and what they had done during the jihad against the infidels, they were overcome with anxiety and fear and fled the country to a town called Kidad in the country of the Somalis. Now, this is when Gurey goes fights the Ethiopians, and he's very successful. And Gurey at this point had run away from, I think, the city, and he had gone to the land of the Balo people. He stays there, and that's when he goes and he attacks the Ethiopians or the Abyssinians. And now, since he's the enemy of Abu Bakr hears about that, and he's worried that this young man has been very successful at beating the Abyssinians, and then they find that they become anxious and they are fearful. And it's after that when now Imam Gurey comes that Abu Bakr escapes and goes to the land of the Somalis. Now this makes the story about his identity very complex, you will agree, because it kind of tells us that he was not with the Somalis. That means he wasn't a Somali. I don't think we should come to that conclusion so fast, because here is again where the story of the origin of, or the home of Abu Bakr comes in. Remember, Abu Bakr comes from they come from the same place with Imam Gurey, but Abu Bakr has the support of the Somali people. Now that tells me it's not necessarily that Abu Bakr was a Somali. And it also leaves the door open that it's possible he was a Somali, but he had the support of the Somali. And it's also possible that Gurey was a Somali who did not have the support of the Somali. Anything is possible at this point. Now, when Gurey at some point goes and Abu Bakr comes back from the land of the Somalis, at least according to the story written by Arab Faqih. And when he comes back, at some point, Imam Gurey has to escape also, because he couldn't match Abu Bakr. The writer says, the Imam and his companions returned to their country, Harar, part of the land of the Saad ad-Din. Now, there's that paragraph. So, which leaves you thinking Gurey was an Harari, because he goes back to his country. So, yeah, then it opens the door. He's an Harari. Reading the part of this document that I thought was going to at least shed some light on the ethnic identity of Gurey, I left still with mixed information. It seems like the writer is trying to say he was an Harari. And that, but again, going by who Abu Bakr was, it also leaves the door open that maybe he was a Somali. But I'm leaning more towards he was an Harari and not a Somali, at least going by what is in this document. And I will ask you to read the document if you get the time. It seems like it's a book, of course, it's a long book, but sometimes you have to pay with time and patience to get some of these facts. So if you have your free time, you can get the Futu al-Habasa and read it for yourself so that you don't rely on somebody like me who is also confused to come to the conclusion. But personally, I'm leaning more towards he was an Harari. The writer does also at some point explain that Imam Gurey did win over the Somali people. He did meet their elders, he did have conversations with them, and they ended up really liking him and they joined his force. That told me that most likely was not a Somali, because if he was a Somali, there was no need for him to go through the elders and the leaders of the community to try to build a relationship with them. He would have easily just not needed that. The way the writer puts is like he really needed to have a formal link, like he was coming, like he was an outsider, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so yeah, go read the document for yourself. And yeah, and I need to still answer to Jabarto or Jabarta. I'm sorry if I'm not getting your name right. The documents you've shared with me in the DM mostly look like they were written in the 19th century, 20th century, and mostly by Europeans. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I thought maybe we should go a little bit back, and that's why I decided to go check the Futu al-Habasa, a book written by someone who was in that part of the world around that time. Those are my random thoughts.